The next thing we wanted to do was look at TAKS, which is a state assessment, right? Because the Stanford data is great, but what's going to get principals' attention? What's going to get the superintendent's attention? What's going to get the school board's attention is performance on the state assessments. So this was the passing rates that we looked at. And if you look at '08, if you guys look at '08, the green line is the passing rates on the reading and the math portion of this test for the average special ed student in the district. So in '08, they passed at 63% and 47% respectively. If you'll notice, the blue line are those kids from that behavior program, right? So what you see there is what? It's the classic kind of achievement, that gap that we talk about with the students with behavioral problems. In '09, we saw a closing of that gap to almost a normalizing of the passing rates for reading and math. Whoops. Now, one of the things that we were interested in again was not only do we see differences, but again, how much of this can we account for as a function of implementation? And this slide looks at that. So again, the green line represents the same group. The blue line represents those teachers that implemented at an above average rate. And the yellow line represents those teachers that implemented at a below average rate. Now, if you'll notice the green and the yellow line, do you see how the slope of those lines are pretty much parallel? Right, so what's that tell you? Probably the gain in the yellow group is a byproduct of an overall improvement in the special ed program's performance on the TAKS. Does that make sense? So, and what was interesting was this was around the same time they implemented a new reading and math program in the district. So some of the gains that we saw were attributable to this curriculum being implemented probably more broadly in the special education programs. The difference, though, or that's most significant, is for the teachers that implement it consistently. And that's where the slope of their line is much steeper, which is indicating, that there's something else at work. And our perspective, it's the more consistent the teachers are in the implementations, the more pronounced the behavioral improvement is, and consequently, the impact on academic achievement. So this is the data that we tried to present at more of a district level. So as we talk about this today and we were putting this together, we really wanted to kind of give people a sense of what we think is important to collect, the type of data to collect for special education at the different tiers of services, but then also the importance of rolling this data up to really support your initiatives locally, but also more broadly across the district. We do a lot of good things, a lot of good work in special education. I don't think we're as good kind of tooting our own horn about the work that happens in special education. And so that's where when we work with districts, we collect this information so they can share it. There's similar data about other types of disability groups, but a lot of, and when we present this data, I always like to add the caveat that what we think Review 360 does is help facilitate the implementation process and help provide some support for teachers as they go through the implementation. But the hard work, the heavy lifting of these initiatives are left to the teachers and the coordinators in your campuses and having the systems in place. And as I've said kind of time and time again today, the success of any initiative is all based on implementation and getting support from implementation. And that's why we think the data is so critical. Any other questions or comments? Yes, sir.
When you say, I'm not sure it was a general statement, but when you say that you take support for implementation, I assume you mean administrative support for teachers to collect the data.
Yeah.
Can you?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Well, what I like to do is when we put an initiative in place, obviously you have to get the principal support. Right, or administrator on the campus has to be supportive of the initiatives. And without their support, the initiatives just won't happen. And a lot of times they'll say they'll be supportive of the initiatives, but I think you have to be specific with them on what that means. So we actually have kind of a checklist of items that we ask the principals to do. So that when you go in to visit with the teacher, ask them how the teachers are doing, ask them to see some of the progress reports in Review 360, ask them to see some of the charts. When we have meetings about students, ask them to bring their data. And it's not just Review 360. We do this with all the initiatives. So it's giving the administrators a checklist of questions that they can ask about the implementation with their teachers. Also, the implementation steps on the strategies that I showed you earlier, we put those there for two reasons. Obviously, we want to help teachers understand what to do, but they also serve as a treatment fidelity check. So that if a teacher is saying, well, I've tried these strategies and these strategies don't work with these kids, someone, whether it's a coordinator or a counselor, can pull up the strategy tip sheet and talk about which of the steps do you think gives you the most trouble? Which steps is where we fall down? If they can't really identify that, then they're probably not implementing the strategies. If they can say, well, I do okay with number 1 and number 2, number 3 is where I struggle, then that's where we work on individualizing the strategy more specifically. But having kind of that, getting back to your original question, having that checklist of items that an assistant principal or a principal can ask the teacher. The other thing that we do is we ask the principal to assign someone on the campus to be kind of the administrative responsible person. So who's going to be the one that's going to kind of check on this? And often it's the assistant principal who takes care of discipline. That's the person that will check in on these types of things. Or maybe the special ed chair. The special ed chair may as well. So those are the two things that we find to be helpful. Yes, sir?
The other question, how are teachers that have been implementing this program, how do they react to the data collection as well as continuing to
do their job? And that's a good question. It's one we always get, right? And so what we generally find is that when we take data collection processes they're already doing and we make it easier for them, then teachers get very excited about it. So in behavior programs, they're typically having some sort of point system or there's something already there in place. And when you're making that easier for them, the response is great. Our implementation rates are pretty high to begin with. And the reason that they tend to be pretty high is because we look for ways that you're collecting data already and to automate that. So we try to avoid as much as possible introducing the software and new data collection systems at the exact same time. Because when you do that, that becomes overwhelming because they have to learn a new process and a new piece of software. And it's easy to associate the process with the tool and to say, I don't want to do it, and then give you pushback on it. But if you will say to them, we're going to have to collect data and have kind of a beginning step on that process, make it manageable for them, have them collect some of it by paper to begin with, on paper and pencil, and then introduce the tool tends to be received better because you're making their life easier. But generally, we get pretty strong responses from teachers. It's where they don't have any data collection process at all. That's where we need to plan the implementation better. Also, we don't call things pilots because pilots die. Pilots come and go. And whether it's true or not, we use the term phased implementation. Because a phased implementation sends the message that this isn't something that a pilot says that this might stay or it might go. A phased implementation, you can do the same thing, but it's the language around it. Any other questions or comments? No? Okay. How are you doing on time?
7 minutes.
Okay, all right. So, you guys have an extra 7 minutes to get ready for the next round of prizes. So one thing that we do have in the back is if you wouldn't mind taking a couple minutes just to give us some feedback about the session, we have a little form right there that we ask some folks to do, just to kind of give us some feedback as to whether or not it's helpful. But I do appreciate your time today and appreciate you spending the hour with us. So I hope you enjoy the rest of your conference. And I hope you get to enjoy Hilton Head a little bit later. Thanks.